The push was so fierce that Nkechi's cry split the air like a cracked drum. Ifunanya gasped, her hands trembling, her face drained of color. For a heartbeat, the world slowed. Nkechi's arms flailed, her beaded crown loosened, and her eyes widened with a mix of shock and betrayal. The edge gave way beneath her sandals, and she fell into the yawning void, her gown billowing like a torn cloud. The roar of the river below rose to greet her, its waves flashing white like teeth ready to devour. Adanma, chest heaving, watched her stepdaughter vanish into the abyss. In the heart of Umuaka, a village that thrived under the rhythm of ancestral drums and the wisdom of its elders, there came into the world a child whose destiny would one day stir the tongues of storytellers and singers across generations. Her name was Nkechi, which in the Igbo tongue meant, "What God has given." She was born on a night when the moon bathed the land in silver light, and the village elders, gathered around the compound of her parents, declared that a child born under such a sky carried the blessing of the spirits. Her father, Chief Obiezi, was a man whose presence commanded respect. Broad-chested, tall, with a beard streaked with wisdom even in his younger years. He was known not only for his wealth of yam barns and farmlands, but for his wisdom in settling disputes and guiding the people in council. Nkechi's mother, Ezine, was a woman whose laughter flowed like the clear water of the stream, and whose heart overflowed with kindness. Together they nurtured the child with all the warmth that love and tradition could offer. Yet the threads of fate are never woven without knots, for before Nkechi's 6th birthday, the spirits called Ezine home. Her death came like the sudden Harmattan winds, unexpected, fierce, and leaving the village covered in dust and sorrow. The women wailed, the men beat their chests, and the child, too young to understand the permanence of death, clung to her father's wrapper, asking again and again when her mother would return from her long sleep. From that moment, her world lost a vital shade of light. But Chief Obiez, though broken, tried to fill the void, raising his daughter with as much tenderness as he could muster, while balancing the heavy burdens of leadership. The village elders, however, whispered that a child could not grow whole without a mother's touch, and tradition pushed him to take another wife. Thus entered Adanma, a woman of striking beauty with smooth, dark skin, almond-shaped eyes that glimmered like a still pool, and a smile that could disarm even the wariest heart. She was welcomed into the compound with dances and songs. But, as the old ones say, not every pot that shines contains sweet soup. Beneath Adanma's fine appearance was a heart where jealousy and bitterness slept like coiled serpents, waiting for the warmth of envy to awaken them. Though she carried herself with grace before the villagers, and though she played the role of a dutiful wife before Chief Obiezi, her eyes narrowed whenever they rested on little Nkechi. For the child, even in her grief, had inherited her mother's gentle beauty and her father's dignified bearing. Each smile that lit Nkechi's face seemed to mark Adanma's place in the household, reminding her that no matter what she did, the spirit of Ezine still lived through her daughter. And in Adanma's heart, a dangerous thought began to grow. This child is a shadow I cannot escape. One day I will blot her out. From the very first day Adanma set foot in Chief Obieze's compound, her relationship with young Nkechi was like oil and water, never mixing, always colliding. In the public eye, she wore the mask of a loving stepmother. She would pat the child's head gently during market days, pressing warm akara balls into her small palms while the villagers looked on. "See how she mothers the orphan child," they would murmur approvingly. But when the compound walls closed and no watchful eyes remained, Adanma revealed the thorn hidden beneath her rose. Her voice, which sang like honey in the open, turned sharp like the crack of a cane. She ordered Nkechi to scrub the cooking pots until her small fingers blistered, to sweep the wide courtyard before dawn, and to fetch water from the stream even when the sun scorched the earth. Whenever Nkechi faltered, she hissed words that pierced deeper than any whip. "Do not think you are special because your father praises you. Remember, your mother is gone, and you are nothing without me." Such venom would have broken many children, leaving their hearts wounded beyond repair. But Nkechi, though young, carried within her the resilience of her mother's spirit and the quiet strength of her father's lineage. At night, when tears soaked her thin raffia mat, she would whisper to herself the words her mother once sang. "The child of light cannot be hidden in darkness." And somehow she endured. What Adanma failed to understand was that the ancestors of Umuaka had not abandoned Ezina's child. They watched from the spirit world, shielding her path like unseen guardians. Each insult that Adanma flung became, unknowingly, a stone strengthening the foundation of Nkechi's spirit. Where bitterness could have taken root, resilience bloomed instead. Where despair could have lingered, determination grew. By the time Nkechi entered school, she had already learned how to turn pain into fuel, how to endure hardship with quiet dignity, and how to find comfort in the whispers of the wind that seemed to carry her mother's voice. And so, while Adanma schemed in shadows, Nkechi began to shine in the light of knowledge, drawing admiration from teachers and elders alike, much to her stepmother's growing envy. Satr Shordi Fawz, Paragraph 3, 500 words. School became the sanctuary where Nkechi's spirit truly unfolded. In a classroom built of mud walls and a zinc roof that rattled like drums during the rains, she sat with keen eyes and an eager mind, drinking deeply from the cup of knowledge. Her teachers marveled at her quick grasp of lessons, saying her memory was sharp as the blade of a newly forged machete. She wrote her letters with care, her handwriting flowing like Nsibidi symbols etched by wise men of old. Numbers bent easily to her will, and stories flowed from her lips like water from the sacred spring. While other children hurried home at the final bell, eager to play with skipping ropes or chase goats through the village paths, Nkechi lingered under the fading orange glow of the evening sun, bent over her books, determined to master every lesson. Her dream was not only her own, it was a torch she carried for her late mother. A way to prove that her bloodline would not be forgotten, that Ezine's spirit still walked in triumph through her daughter. The villagers noticed too. Old men sitting beneath the great Iroko tree would nod as she passed, murmuring, "This child carries greatness on her head like a calabash filled with wealth." But in the shadows of the compound, Adanma's heart grew heavier with poison. Each prize Nkechi won, each praise her father showered upon her, became like a hot coal pressed against Adanma's chest. She longed for her own daughter, Ifunanya, to shine just as brightly. But the girl, though playful and full of charm, lacked Nkechi's fire. She could not solve sums as quickly, nor did her stories move the teachers' hearts. And so the comparisons grew, whispered first by villagers, then by Obieze himself, who in his pride would exclaim, "Nkechi will be the light of Umuaka, a daughter who honors both her mother and her father." These words, though spoken in love, became daggers in Adanma's ears. In the privacy of her chamber, she would pace like a caged leopard, her nails digging into her palms as she muttered darkly, "How can the child of a dead woman outshine my living blood? No, it cannot be. Her light must be dimmed." Thus began the planting of darker seeds, thoughts that would one day blossom into deadly schemes. As Nkechi's light grew brighter, the contrast between her and her stepsister Ifunanya became impossible to ignore. In the compound, Adanma doted on her own child, dressing her in bright wrappers, adorning her hair with cowries, and praising her even for the smallest deeds. But the villagers, ever observant, measured children not by beauty of dress, but by the strength of their character. They saw how Nkechi rose before dawn, balancing heavy clay pots on her head as she fetched water from the stream, only to hurry to school with her books tucked beneath her arm. They saw how she offered to help her classmates with lessons, how she greeted her elders with a voice sweet as palm wine, and how she bore her stepmother's cruelty with silence and grace. And in their eyes, the comparison between the two girls tilted heavily toward Nkechi. This fueled Adanma's rage until it burned like dry firewood in Harmattan. Chief Obieze, blinded by love for both daughters, often praised Nkechi without realizing how his words stabbed at his wife's pride. "This girl," he would boast at gatherings, "will bring honor to my name. She will become a voice not only for Umuaka, but for the whole land." Such declarations, though intended as fatherly pride, were daggers twisting deeper into Adanma's envious heart. At night, when the compound slept, she lay awake, staring at the raffia ceiling, her mind a hive of restless thoughts. How can I let this girl overshadow my own blood? Ifunanya is my daughter, yet she stands in Nkechi's shadow. The people whisper about her brilliance, but what of my child? What will become of her if Nkechi continues to rise? Her envy became like a slow poison, seeping into every part of her being. Even when she looked into her husband's eyes, she no longer saw love, but betrayal, for she believed his pride in Nkechi diminished her own worth. In the privacy of her chamber, she muttered curses, pacing like a restless spirit, and more than once she whispered to the dark, "This light must be extinguished. If I do nothing, I will forever live in her shadow." It was then that Adanma's thoughts began to grow darker, shifting from envy to plotting. She started to test the edges of cruelty, giving Nkechi tasks designed to break her spirit. If the girl faltered, perhaps her star would dim. If she stumbled, perhaps her father and the village would turn their gaze away. But each attempt only revealed more of Nkechi's resilience, and this endurance, instead of discouraging Adanma, only fanned her malice into flames that would one day blaze into deadly action. Adanma's schemes began quietly, like the first rustle of dry leaves before a storm. She made sure Nkechi's chores multiplied whenever examinations approached, hoping the girl would fail and bring shame upon herself. On evenings before important school days, she would keep her busy pounding yam until her arms ached, or send her on endless errands, fetching palm oil, splitting firewood, or carrying heavy basins from the stream. Yet, as if the ancestors themselves guided her, Nkechi endured each trial. She rose before cockcrow, balancing her duties with her studies, her determination as steady as the flame of an oil lamp in the wind. Many nights she studied under the faint glow of a kerosene lantern, her books spread before her while the compound slept. Sometimes her stomach growled, for Adanma had denied her supper, but she fed her mind instead, whispering her mother's remembered words, "Knowledge is a lamp that never goes out." Each test, each cruel trick Adanma devised, became like the tempering of iron in fire, making Nkechi stronger. The village noticed her perseverance. Teachers spoke of her brilliance with admiration, saying she solved sums as swiftly as the lightning that cuts across the sky. The elders, sitting under the great Iroko tree, nodded whenever her name was mentioned, declaring, "This child carries destiny on her head." But this chorus of praise only deepened Adanma's fury. She began to feel hunted by Nkechi's success, as though every smile, every cheer for the girl was an insult aimed at her own womb. Even Ifunanya, though she loved her sister in her own way, could not escape the comparisons whispered among peers. "Your sister is so clever," they told her. "Will you be like her?" These words stung Ifunanya's pride, and though she never spoke them aloud, a seed of resentment began to grow even in her. Adanma saw this and fanned it like a flame, telling her daughter in private, "Do not let her overshadow you. Remember, she is not of my blood. You are the true jewel of this house." In this way, she began to turn Ifunanya's heart slowly away from her sister. Still, Nkechi remained steadfast, unaware of how deep the darkness around her had grown. She poured herself into her studies, carrying not just her own dreams, but the memory of her mother like a torch lighting her path. She dreamed of graduation, of stepping proudly into the future her mother had once prayed for, but what she could not see was the venom gathering in her stepmother's heart, thickening each day like storm clouds swelling over the horizon, waiting for the moment to break. As Nkechi's final year in school drew to a close, the entire village of Umuaka began to buzz with anticipation. Graduation was not a common achievement, especially for girls, and many saw Nkechi's success as a victory for them all. The drummers rehearsed beneath the baobab tree, preparing rhythms that would make the earth itself dance. Women gathered bright wrappers to wear for the occasion, practicing ululations that would echo across the hills. Elders polished their staffs, ready to bless the child they believed was destined for greatness. Even children whispered her name during moonlight tales, saying, "Nkechi will one day lead us to a brighter future." For her father, Chief Obiezi, pride glowed in his heart like a steady flame. He spoke of little else in council meetings, declaring, "My daughter will be the jewel of Umuaka." Her mother smiles in the spirit world because Nkechi carries her light. But where others saw joy, Adanma saw humiliation. She had tried every trick, burdens, hunger, distractions, yet Nkechi still stood on the cusp of triumph. And so, as the village prepared drums of celebration, Adanma prepared drums of destruction. She whispered to herself in the stillness of night, "Graduation shall be her last day. Before she tastes glory, she will taste death." At first, her thoughts frightened even her, for the ancestors frown upon bloodshed within family. But envy is a spirit more stubborn than any taboo, and it pressed upon her heart until she could no longer resist. She began to weave her plot with careful steps. She spoke softly to her daughter Ifunanya, feeding her envy, and together they rehearsed a performance of false concern for Nkechi's well-being. She hid her venom beneath smiles, convincing even Chief Obieze that she too rejoiced in the girl's success. Yet behind her eyes, the storm gathered. Her plan was simple, cruel, and absolute: to lead Nkechi to the edge of the cliff, where the river roared below like an open mouth waiting for sacrifice. But fate, mischievous as Anansi the trickster, was already spinning counter-threads she did not see. For the same cliff that she chose as a death would one day become the stage of her undoing. On the morning of the graduation, the compound awoke before the cock crowed. Songs rose with the dawn as women painted their faces with white chalk, and children danced about in excitement. Nkechi's gown, pure white with a blue sash across her shoulders, made her look like a spirit maiden descending from the clouds. Her crown braid glittered with beads that clinked softly as she walked, each step announcing dignity and grace. Her father, overwhelmed with pride, could barely contain his tears. He kissed her forehead and said, "Your mother walks with you today." But even as joy bubbled in the air, shadows lingered in silence. Adanma, dressed in a deep red wrapper embroidered with gold, wore a smile that was wide yet empty. She moved about helping guests, her voice smooth like palm oil on a hot pan, but her heart drummed only one thought: today ends her journey. When it was time to walk to the ceremony, she suggested a different path. "Let us pass by the high ridge," she said sweetly. "It is shorter, and the breeze will cool us before the gathering." Chief Obieze, unsuspecting, agreed. The party began to move, with drummers already playing ahead, drawing the attention of many villagers. Nkechi, radiant in her gown, walked slightly in front, her laughter floating like music. Ifunanya walked beside her, smiling on the outside but hiding a heart twisted by her mother's whispers. And Adanma walked behind them, every step calculating. What she did not know was that fate had laid an unseen twist. Hidden among the tall grasses near the ridge was a hunter who had paused to rest from his morning tracking. His ears caught their voices, and his eyes, sharp as an eagle's, watched the group approach. In that moment, the story that Adanma thought she controlled was about to slip from her hands, for the hunter was no ordinary man, but one marked by destiny to intervene. As the path narrowed near the cliff and the roar of the river below grew louder, the villagers ahead were distracted by drums, leaving only Adanma, her daughter, and Nkechi near the edge. And in the space between heartbeat and action, Adanma placed her hand against Nkechi's back, her lips curving in triumph. But the ancestors, always watching, had already called upon their own witness to the unfolding act of betrayal. The moment came, like lightning, striking a dry tree, sudden, brutal, and without warning. As Nkechi stood at the ridge, the wind lifted her gown and made her beads sing softly, like the ancestors whispering their approval of her journey. She turned to point at a bird circling the valley below, her laughter spilling like sunlight through rain. It was then that Adanma's eyes hardened into stone. All her nights of plotting, all her whispers to Ifunanya, all her envy that had boiled into venom, everything condensed into a single act. With a force that carried both rage and fear of being overshadowed, she shoved Nkechi's back. The push was so fierce that Nkechi's cry split the air like a cracked drum. Ifunanya gasped, her hands trembling, her face drained of color. For a heartbeat, the world slowed. Nkechi's arms flailed, her beaded crown loosened, and her eyes widened with a mix of shock and betrayal. The edge gave way beneath her sandals, and she fell into the yawning void, her gown billowing like a torn cloud. The roar of the river below rose to greet her, its waves flashing white like teeth ready to devour. Adanma, chest heaving, watched her stepdaughter vanish into the abyss, and for a fleeting moment, satisfaction flickered across her face. But it was followed by an eerie silence that even she could not bear. Ifunanya clutched her mother's arm and whispered, "Mama, what have you done?" Her voice trembled, not just with horror, but with the first seed of rebellion against the mother she once obeyed blindly. Yet Adanma silenced her with a sharp glance, whispering, "She is gone. Say nothing. What is dead speaks no more." They turned, adjusting their wrappers, rehearsing their false grief to perform at the gathering. But unknown to them, two eyes had seen everything. The hunter, hidden in the grass. He rose to his feet, muscles coiled, his bow slung across his shoulder. His heart pounded, not only with the urgency of what he had witnessed, but with a strange pull, as though the ancestors themselves had placed him there for this moment. His name was Obinna, a man whose past was tangled with mysteries, whose path rarely crossed the village of Umuaka, yet now fate had bound him to it with unbreakable thread. He dashed toward the cliff, scanning the churning waters below, his sharp gaze searching for movement. And then he saw her. Nkechi, though battered by the fall, clung desperately to a protruding root that jutted out from the cliff's side. Her fingers, small yet fierce, refused to let go, even as the current threatened to tear her down. Her eyes, wide with terror, met Obinna's gaze above. And though they were strangers, in that instant a silent pact was born. He would not let her perish. Obinna moved with the speed of a leopard. He anchored his hunting rope to the trunk of a sturdy tree, wrapping it around twice for strength. Sliding down the cliff face, his bare feet gripped stone, his strong hands steadying the rope with practiced skill. Below, Nkechi's strength was fading. Her fingers trembled, her knuckles scraped raw, her body battered by the spray of the river. She whispered her mother's name, "Mama," as though calling to the one who had abandoned her, not yet realizing it was another woman's hands that had betrayed her. But destiny had chosen a different savior. When Obinna reached her, their eyes met again, his sharp, eagle-like gaze softened with compassion, hers wide with disbelief that help had come. "Hold on," he commanded firmly, his deep voice steady against the chaos of the roaring river. "I have you." With a swift motion, he gripped her wrist, his muscles straining as he pulled her up against his chest. She gasped, clinging to him, her tears mixing with the spray of the waters. He secured her against the rope and began the climb, every movement slow and deliberate, for the cliff was unforgiving, and one slip meant death for them both. Above, the villagers' drumming and laughter masked the drama unfolding, but the ancestors watched in silence, weaving their judgment into the wind. Halfway up, a rock beneath his foot loosened and tumbled into the river, splashing like thunder. Nkechi buried her face into his shoulder, trembling. "Do not fear," Obinna whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "The river will not claim you today." His words were more than comfort. They carried a weight, as though he had spoken an oath not just to her, but to the unseen spirits that hovered. At last, they reached the top. Obinna lifted her over the ridge, laying her gently upon the grass. Her gown was torn, her beads scattered, her hair loosened, but she was alive, breathing, sobbing, trembling with the shock of betrayal and salvation. She clutched his hand, refusing to let go, her eyes flooding with questions she could not yet voice. And Obinna, kneeling beside her, studied her face with an intensity that stirred something deep within him. He had saved many lives in his years of hunting, rescuing lost children and fending off wild beasts, but this felt different. This was no accident. This was fate. "Rest, maiden," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her damp cheek. "You are safe now. But remember, evil walks in shadows, even in places you trust." His words pierced her like arrows, for though he did not know the details, her heart screamed the truth. It was no accident. Her stepmother's hands had cast her into the abyss. Nkechi lay on the soft grass, her chest rising and falling as though the earth itself was forcing breath back into her body. The roar of the river still echoed in her ears, and the vision of her stepmother's cold, victorious eyes haunted her mind like a shadow she could not escape. Every detail of the betrayal replayed mercilessly. The shove, the sensation of weightlessness, the scream that tore from her throat, the hungry waters waiting below. She had grown up believing that even if Adanma disliked her, there was a line that would never be crossed. But the truth now stood naked before her. The woman she had called mother for years had not only despised her, she had wanted her gone, erased from existence. Tremors ran through her hands as she pressed them against her face, sobbing not just from fear, but from the collapse of the fragile bond she once hoped would mend. Beside her, Obinna crouched silently, his hunter's instincts alert, his eyes sweeping the surroundings to ensure no witness lingered. He understood the gravity of what he had seen, the cruelty of kinship turning into an attempt at murder. But he also sensed the danger in exposing it too soon. "You must not return to them tonight," he said finally, his deep voice breaking her thoughts. "If you walk back into their hands, the river may yet claim you another way." His words carried both wisdom and warning, and Nkechi, though shaken, recognized the truth in them. She looked at him properly now, the sharp cut of his jaw, the tribal marks etched faintly across his cheek, the muscles honed from years of hunting in unforgiving terrain. And yet, beneath that rugged strength, there was a gentleness in his gaze that unsettled her heart. She had never been held the way he had gripped her, never been protected so fiercely in a moment of pure despair. "Why would you risk your life for mine?" she whispered hoarsely, her voice raw from the river spray. Obinna's lips curved into a faint, unreadable smile. "Because destiny brought me here," he replied, "and because no soul should perish to satisfy envy." The words rang like a proverb, one that might have been uttered by the griots of old, and they lodged in her spirit like a seed that would soon grow roots. She pressed her hands against the earth, as though grounding herself in the reality that she was alive, even when death had reached out to claim her. The drums of her graduation feast still faintly thundered in the distance, mocking her absence, reminding her that while she hid here with a stranger, her name was already being mourned or erased. She lifted her head slowly and met his eyes again. Something unspoken passed between them, a fragile thread binding two lives that had no reason to intertwine, yet now could never be separated. Meanwhile, back at the village square, Adanma played her role with flawless precision. She burst into the crowd of dancers and drummers, her wrapper loosened as if in distress, her wails slicing through the music like a sudden storm. "My child! My Nkechi! The river has taken her!" she cried, collapsing into the dust, clutching her chest with trembling fingers. Elders rushed to her side, their staffs thumping against the ground as they struggled to steady her. Ifunanya stood behind her, lips pressed into a thin line, eyes darting nervously. She wanted to speak the truth, to scream that her mother had pushed Nkechi with her own hands, but fear wrapped itself around her throat like an iron chain. To accuse Adanma publicly was to risk being cast out herself, and so she bit her tongue, watching as the village began to murmur, some women clapping their hands in grief, others shaking their heads in disbelief. "The river spirits were angered," Adanma continued between her sobs, weaving her lie with a serpent's tongue. "She slipped while gazing upon the valley, and the river devoured her before I could save her." Her performance was so convincing that even the elders bowed their heads, muttering prayers for the young girl whose future had been snatched by the unforgiving waters. But deep inside, Adanma felt triumph coil like a snake. With Nkechi gone, Ifunanya alone would shine, and her own influence in the village would grow unchecked. Yet Adanma underestimated the ancestors' justice, for no lie lasts forever beneath the eyes of spirits who walk the land unseen. As the people prepared to perform rites for the drowned, the village gong sounded thrice, signaling the close of the celebration. Women fetched calabashes of palm wine, pouring libations to appease the river, while the men began to sing dirges, their voices rising in mournful unison. Only the chief priest, Ezioha, watched Adanma with narrowed eyes. His intuition, sharpened by decades of communion with the spirits, told him that her tears were not entirely pure. He said nothing yet, but within him stirred a quiet determination to uncover the truth when the time was ripe. And in that very moment, far from their ears, Nkechi lay hidden in the forest with Obinna, alive, breathing, and destined to rewrite the fate her stepmother had tried to seal. The night grew heavy, stars piercing the sky above Umuaka, as if ancestors themselves were keeping watch. Obinna led Nkechi deeper into the forest that night, his torch cutting a golden path through the shadows. The forest was alive with the hum of cicadas and the distant calls of owls, their eyes glowing like lanterns in the darkness. Nkechi followed closely, her gown torn, her feet bare and scratched, every step a reminder of how close she had come to death. Her heart still raced, not only from the fall, but from the storm of emotions within her, grief, betrayal, fear, and an unexpected stirring she could not yet name. At last, they reached a small clearing where Obinna's hut stood, a structure of mud walls and thatched roof, simple yet strong, tucked beneath the protective arms of towering iroko trees. A small fire burned outside, its smoke curling into the night sky. He gestured for her to sit on a low wooden stool as he fetched a calabash of cool water. "Drink," he said softly, placing it in her trembling hands. She drank deeply, the liquid soothing her dry throat, and for the first time since her fall, she felt a sliver of calm. Obinna studied her quietly, the firelight casting shadows across his sharp features. "You must rest here," he told her. "The village believes you gone. To return now would be to place your neck once more into the lion's jaws." His words struck her heart like a spear. She wanted to deny it, to defend her stepmother despite the truth she had seen with her own eyes. But the memory of Adanma's cold push silenced every protest. She whispered, "She wanted me dead." Obinna nodded slowly, as if confirming what the spirits had already revealed. "Envy burns hotter than firewood, and it consumes the hand that feeds it. But do not fear. You are alive, and life itself is a weapon stronger than their hatred." His voice carried the weight of proverbs, as though every sentence was an ancestral teaching. Nkechi's tears flowed freely then, and for the first time in years she allowed herself to be vulnerable in front of another. Obinna did not move closer, did not reach to touch her, but his presence was like a shield, steady and unyielding. As the fire crackled between them, something unspoken passed in the silence, the beginning of a bond neither of them could yet explain. Nkechi, though battered, began to sense that fate had spared her for a reason greater than survival alone. Back in the village, Adanma slept soundly on her raffia mat, convinced her plan had succeeded, but the whispers had already begun. Some villagers swore they had seen the way she lingered at the cliff's edge, how her face had not carried the shock of a mother witnessing her daughter's death, but rather the calm of one expecting it. Ifunanya lay awake beside her, eyes fixed on the ceiling, guilt gnawing at her heart. She had said nothing at the feast, but silence was becoming unbearable. She could still hear her sisters scream, still see her fingers clawing at the air before she vanished. But fear of her mother's wrath shackled her tongue. At dawn, the chief priest Ezeoha visited their compound. His staff, adorned with feathers and cowries, struck the ground with each step, announcing his presence before his words even came. Adanma hurried out, wrapping her cloth tightly, feigning grief. "Wise one!" she wailed, bowing low. "The gods have punished me by snatching my daughter." Ezeoha's eyes narrowed, his silence heavier than any accusation. He traced lines in the dust with his staff, and then spoke slowly, his tone grave. "The spirits whispered to me last night. They said the river has not claimed what is not its own." His words hung in the air like a riddle, and Adanma's heart skipped. She forced a sob, clutching her wrapper tighter. "What do you mean, wise one?" "I saw it with my own eyes." Ezeoha leaned closer, his wrinkled face unreadable. "Sometimes the eyes lie. Sometimes the guilty weep the loudest." With that, he turned and left, his staff thumping against the earth. The neighbors who overheard whispered among themselves, suspicion blooming like weeds. Adanma felt the walls closing in, yet she silenced her fears with arrogance. Let them gossip, she muttered to herself. Without proof, they are nothing but buzzing flies. But deep down, her spirit trembled. She had underestimated the weight of truth, and the ancestors had already begun their work. Meanwhile, in the quiet forest hut, Nkechi awoke to the sound of birds singing. For a moment she thought she was back home, safe in her father's compound, but the earthy smell of the hut reminded her of where she was. She sat up slowly, her body aching, her mind heavy with questions. Obinna was outside, sharpening his spear, the muscles of his arms flexing with each movement. She watched him through the doorway, studying the man who had saved her. There was something different about him, not just his strength, but the way he moved with a quiet dignity, as though the forest itself respected his presence. When he noticed her gaze, he smiled faintly. "You are awake," he said, stepping inside. He placed a bowl of steaming yam porridge before her. "Eat. Your strength will return." She hesitated, then took a spoonful, the warmth filling her belly, grounding her after the storm of the past day. "Why do you live here, away from the village?" she asked quietly. His eyes darkened for a moment, and he looked away. "The village is not always kind to those who carry secrets," he replied simply, his voice layered with a pain she recognized but did not press. They sat in silence, the fire between them crackling, their unspoken stories weaving an invisible thread. As she ate, she found herself stealing glances at him. The curve of his lips, the steadiness of his hands, the scar that ran across his forearm, hinting at battles fought and survived. And though her heart still ached with betrayal, she felt it stir in a new, confusing rhythm. Gratitude was slowly transforming into something deeper, something she feared, yet longed for. The forest, with its quiet watchfulness, seemed to approve, as if the ancestors were guiding her heart toward a new path. Back in the village, rumors thickened like harmattan dust. Women at the stream whispered that story did not align with the truth they sensed. Some swore they saw her smiling too soon after the tragedy. Others recalled how she had often spoken ill of Nkechi, calling her the shadow in my house. Ifunanya, weighed down by guilt, avoided the marketplace, her silence becoming louder than words. Each time she looked at her mother, her stomach churned. Meanwhile, Ezeoha prepared for the sacred divination. He gathered kola nuts, chalk, and palm fronds, determined to consult the gods about Nkechi's fate. On the night of the ritual, as drums echoed softly in the background, he cast the kola nuts upon a white cloth. The pieces scattered like stars, and when he read their pattern, his eyes widened. "The girl lives," he declared to the small gathering of elders. Gasps filled the air. One elder muttered, "Then she did not fall by accident." Someone's hand pushed her. Ezeoha nodded gravely, his staff striking the earth. "The ancestors will not be mocked. What is hidden will soon come to light." Word spread quickly, and though Adanma tried to stifle it with louder wails of grief, suspicion had already sunk its claws into the village. She found herself waking at night, sweating, haunted by dreams of the river rising to drag her into its depths. But she clung to her arrogance, telling herself no one could ever prove what she had would shatter every lie. The forest wrapped Nkechi in a cloak of silence, its air scented with damp earth and wildflowers. Days turned into nights, and nights into days. And though her heart still bled from betrayal, Obinna's presence became a strange balm. He taught her to fetch water from the stream, to gather firewood, and to grind herbs for healing wounds. Each lesson was simple, but in his company they felt profound, like rediscovering life's small joys. Sometimes he would tell stories by the fire, tales of the cunning tortoise who tricked the leopard, or of the river goddess who punished greed with storms. His voice carried the rhythm of ancient griots, and she would find herself leaning closer, her eyes reflecting the firelight as though she were a child again, eager to be lulled by the magic of words. In return, Nkechi shared pieces of her life, cautiously at first, her father's early death, her stepmother's growing disdain, the loneliness that haunted her even in a crowded compound. Obinna listened intently, never interrupting, never mocking, and when silence fell, he would meet her eyes with a steady gaze that seemed to say, "You are not alone." Yet beneath this fragile peace, a dangerous current swirled. For each time she caught herself smiling at him, each time her hand brushed his as they worked side by side, a spark flickered that she both feared and craved. She had been taught that love was to be arranged, weighed by families and dowries, but what she felt now was unbidden, rising like a storm she could not stop. At night, lying on the raffia mat Obina gave her, she would close her eyes and still feel the warmth of his hand pulling her from the abyss. Gratitude was no longer enough to explain it. Her heart was moving towards something she dared not yet name. But as love quietly stirred in the forest, unrest brewed in the village. The chief priest Ezeoha summoned the council of elders beneath the great Iroko tree, its roots sprawling like the veins of the earth. Villagers gathered too, their whispers carried by the wind. Ezeoha stood tall, his white chalk markings glowing faintly in the morning sun. "The spirits have spoken," he declared. "The girl Nkechi is not claimed by the river. She walks still upon this earth." Gasps rippled through the crowd, some with joy, others with fear. One elder, gray-bearded Okafor, shook his head. "If she lives, why has she not returned? Perhaps she hides because evil drove her away." His words drew murmurs, and all eyes turned to Adanma. She feigned shock, clutching Ifunanya's hand dramatically. "Do you accuse me?" she demanded, her voice trembling but her eyes sharp. "I weep night and day for my child." Does grief now earn suspicion? The crowd murmured uncertainly, but Ifunanya's face betrayed her turmoil. She avoided their eyes, her silence speaking louder than words. Ezeoha's staff struck the ground, silencing them all. What is hidden cannot remain buried. The ancestors sharpen their blades. If lies walk among us, the truth will cut them down. His warning hung heavy in the air. Though no direct accusation was made, the seed of doubt had sprouted. Adanma returned home seething, her fingers twitching as though itching for another scheme. That night, she berated Ifunanya in hushed, venomous tones. "If you dare open your mouth, I will cast you out. Remember, you have no father to shield you, no one to turn to but me." Ifunanya wept silently into her mat, torn between loyalty to blood and the weight of truth clawing at her chest. Back in the forest hut, Obina noticed the change in Nkechi's eyes. She was no longer just a wounded girl healing from betrayal. She was transforming into something stronger, sharper, like iron forged in fire. One evening, as they roasted fish by the fire, she asked him, "Why did you save me truly?" Many would have looked away. He gazed into the flames before answering, "Because I know what it means to be cast aside. I was once betrayed by those I trusted." His voice carried the heaviness of an unspoken wound. She leaned closer, her curiosity piqued. "Who betrayed you?" His jaw tightened. "That is a tale for another night." She sensed the pain in his silence, and did not press further, but it only drew her nearer to him. Later, as the moon bathed the clearing in silver light, Nkechi found herself studying his profile. The scars on his skin, the strength in his frame, the sadness that lingered in his eyes. She realized that her heart, once chained by fear and loneliness, was now reaching for him, as though he was the only steady thing in a world that had tried to throw her away. Yet danger loomed like a shadow at the edge of the forest. Unknown to them, a young boy gathering firewood had glimpsed Obina leading Nkechi days before. Too frightened to speak, he had kept silent, but now whispers were spreading. Someone had seen a girl who looked like Nkechi in the hunter's hut. The rumor had yet to reach Adanma's ears, but it was only a matter of time before it did. And when it did, her rage would be as deadly as the push that nearly claimed Nkechi's life. Adanma's dreams turned restless, plagued by visions of the river rising in fury, dragging her into its depths while a voice mocked her. "The one you cast down shall rise above you." She woke, drenched in sweat, clutching her chest, her mind gnawed by fear. Yet her pride would not let her confess her crime. Instead, she schemed to silence the growing suspicion. She began visiting the homes of gossiping women, bearing cola nuts and palm oil, trying to bribe their tongues into silence. Some accepted, but others whispered louder, sensing her desperation. Ifunanya watched her mother's spiraling fear with growing unease. For the first time, she wondered if her loyalty to blood was a curse. For each day, her silence felt like a knife carving her heart. Meanwhile, Ezeoha prepared for a greater divination, this time with sacrifices that would call upon the ancestors more forcefully. Word of it spread, and fear gripped Adanma tighter than ever. If they find out, she whispered to herself in the dark, everything will crumble. She resolved that if Nkechi still lived, she must be found and silenced forever. Her envy, once hidden beneath a mask of grief, now twisted her features with rage whenever she was alone. She had destroyed the girl once and would not hesitate to strike again. What she did not know was that Nkechi, alive and under Obina's watch, was no longer the naive girl she once despised. She was becoming a woman shaped by betrayal, strengthened by survival, and armed with the love of a man whose very presence threatened to upend Adanma's schemes. As days passed, the bond between Nkechi and Obina blossomed into something undeniable. She found comfort in his laughter, rare though it was, and he found light in her resilience, the way she smiled despite her wounds. One evening, as the rain poured and thunder rolled over the forest, they sat huddled in his hut, the fire flickering against the storm's fury. Nkechi, shivering, wrapped in his cloak, looked at him with eyes that spoke all the words her lips could not. "I do not know why the gods spared me," she whispered, "but if it was to bring me here, to you, then perhaps it was not punishment but blessing." Her confession left her breathless, but Obina did not turn away. Instead, he reached for her hand, his touch firm, yet tender. "Perhaps we were both chosen," he said quietly. The storm raged outside, but inside, a new storm swirled, a storm of hearts intertwining, of destinies colliding. For the first time since her fall, Nkechi felt not just alive, but reborn. Yet neither of them knew how fragile their sanctuary was, how quickly the outside world was closing in. In the village, rumors grew louder, the priest's divination loomed, and Adanma's hunger for control burned hotter than ever. Fate was weaving its web, and soon all threads would be pulled tight, revealing who would rise and who would fall. The morning of the great divination arrived, and the entire village gathered at the sacred grove. Palm fronds decorated the clearing, drums throbbed like the heartbeat of the ancestors, and the air smelled of incense and roasted goat offered to the spirits. Chief priest Ezeoha, robed in white with chalk streaked across his chest, stood before the shrine of the gods. His staff gleamed with cowrie shells as he raised it to the sky. "Let truth speak!" he cried, his voice cutting through the air. Silence fell heavy as he scattered kola nuts upon the earth, watching the way they landed. His eyes narrowed, and he spoke in a voice that did not sound entirely his own. "The girl who was cast down lives. The earth has not swallowed her. The river has not claimed her. Betrayal walked into her home, and envy guided the hand that pushed her." A gasp rose from the villagers, women covering their mouths, men exchanging worried glances. Slowly, heads turned toward Adanma. She stood stiff, her wrapper tied tightly, her face carefully arranged into grief. "Lies!" she shouted, her voice trembling. "The gods test us with riddles! My daughter drowned! I saw it with my own eyes!" But Ezeoha's staff slammed into the ground, shaking the earth beneath them. "No!" he thundered. "It was not the river that took her. It was human hands driven by envy." The villagers erupted into whispers, suspicion sharpening like blades. Ifunanya trembled beside her mother, her face pale as chalk, for though no name had been spoken, she felt as though the priest's voice had pierced her heart. That night, Ifunanya lay awake, her mind a storm. The priest's words echoed endlessly. Envy guided the hand that pushed her. She had always known her mother's hatred of Nkechi was deep, but to imagine her capable of such wickedness had felt impossible, until that day on the cliff. She remembered how her mother returned home disheveled, eyes wild, claiming Nkechi had slipped. Ifunanya had tried to believe it, tried to bury her doubts, but the way her mother's hand shook, the way she forbade her from telling anyone, had haunted her since. Now, with the priest's declaration, those doubts flared into guilt. "If she lives," Ifunanya whispered into the darkness, "then she must be suffering. And if she died, then her blood is on my silence." Tears soaked her mat as her chest tightened with the weight of unspoken truth. She thought of Nkechi's kindness, the way she had always shared food, the way she defended her when other girls mocked her softness. How could she have stood by while her mother destroyed her? Her spirit wavered between loyalty and justice. At dawn, she resolved to find the priest in secret. If her mother had truly murdered Nkechi, then silence was no longer protection. It was poison. She would rather bear her mother's wrath than the curse of the ancestors. Yet, unknown to her, Adanma was already plotting her next move, aware that suspicion was thickening around her like smoke before fire. Meanwhile, Nkechi's life with Obinna deepened in unexpected ways. Each day, the hunter guided her deeper into the mysteries of the forest, the way certain leaves healed wounds, the call of birds that warned of danger, the hidden trails known only to those who listened with their hearts. She thrived in this new life, discovering strength she never knew she had. One evening, she found herself laughing freely as Obinna tried to teach her to set a snare, only for her to trip and fall into his arms. The moment lingered, their laughter fading into silence as their eyes met. He brushed a leaf from her hair, and she felt her breath catch. "You are not as helpless as you think," he murmured. "You survived the cliff. You survived betrayal. You carry fire in you." His words struck deep, igniting both pride and longing. She realized then that what she felt for him was not fleeting gratitude. It was love, dangerous and fierce. Yet with that love came fear. Could she remain in this hidden world forever, safe in his arms, or must she face the truth waiting beyond the forest? The whispers of destiny tugged at her heart. For though she longed to forget her past, her spirit reminded her, "You were not saved to hide. You were saved to rise." And somewhere beyond the trees, she knew Adanma's shadow was still reaching for her. Back in the village, Adanma's desperation reached fever pitch. The Council of Elders demanded a cleansing ritual to banish the curse of deceit, and Ezeoha insisted that the guilty would be exposed when the offering was made. Adanma feigned outrage, but her nights were sleepless, her thoughts filled with clawing dread. She tried to manipulate Ifunanya with sweetness, cooking her favorite yam pottage and speaking softly, but the girl recoiled, her eyes guarded. "You must trust me," Adanma whispered, gripping her hand. "If we do not stand together, they will tear us apart." But Ifunanya's silence cut sharper than words. She began avoiding her mother, sneaking away at night to pour libations at her late father's grave, begging his spirit for guidance. Adanma noticed and grew more paranoid, convinced her daughter would betray her. "If she speaks," Adanma hissed to herself one night, "everything will end." She resolved to act swiftly, to silence Ifunanya before the girl could confess. Yet even as she plotted, fate was moving faster than her schemes. For the boy who had seen Nkechi in the forest finally spoke, whispering his secret to his grandmother, who wasted no time spreading the tale. By the next market day, tongues wagged. "The lost girl is alive. The hunter hides her." The rumor flew like wildfire, reaching the ears of the priest himself. And so the path began to close, drawing Nkechi and Obinna back into the world they thought they had escaped. The revelation struck the village like thunder. Ezeoha summoned the elders once again, his face grave. "If the girl walks among the living, then we must see her with our eyes. Let the hunter be summoned." Messengers were sent into the forest, and whispers spread like restless winds. Adanma's face drained of color when she heard. If Nkechi truly lived, her crimes would no longer be whispers. They would be carved in stone. She stormed into her hut, pacing like a trapped animal. "She should have died," she hissed, striking the wall with her palm. "She should have drowned." Ifunanya stood in the doorway, her face pale but resolute. "Mother," she said quietly, "if she lives, then the gods themselves have spared her. We must not fight them." Adanma spun around, fury blazing in her eyes. "Silence! Do you think the gods care for us? No! Only power matters, and I will not be shamed by that girl." She raised her hand as though to strike, but Ifunanya stood her ground, her voice trembling but firm. "Then you fight not only her, you fight the spirits, and you will lose." For the first time, Adanma faltered, shaken by her daughter's defiance. Outside, the drums of the village began to beat, summoning all to the square. Destiny was knocking at the door, and no scheme could keep it out. Far in the forest, Obinna and Nkechi, unaware of the storm brewing, walked hand in hand toward a future they could not yet see, one that would demand courage, sacrifice, and the confrontation of truths long buried. The forest whispered as Obinna led Nkechi along the hidden path toward the village. Though she had grown stronger in the wilderness, her heart pounded at the thought of returning. Every step reminded her of the cliff, of her stepmother's hand, and of the narrow escape that had saved her life. Yet, beneath her fear, a spark of determination burned. She would not be cowed. She would not hide forever. Birds took flight overhead, scattering into the morning sky, and the smell of smoke from the distant village fires grew stronger with each passing hour. When they finally crested the ridge, the village spread below them like a patchwork quilt, and Nkechi's breath caught. Her home, once familiar, now seemed alien, dominated by the looming figure of Adanma, who patrolled the square with false grief like armor. Obinna squeezed her hand gently, grounding her. "Stay close," he murmured. "Let your heart guide your steps, but be wary of what awaits." Her fingers gripped his arm in silent acknowledgement. In that moment, she understood the truth of the hunter's teachings. Survival was not enough. She had to face her past, confront it, and reclaim the life stolen from her. The drums from the ceremonial gathering echoed faintly, carrying the rhythm of ancestral eyes watching, waiting. Nkechi inhaled deeply, her gaze steady, her resolve hardening like tempered iron. Word of her approach spread through the village before she even appeared. Elders whispered urgently among themselves, sensing that the spirit's hand was at work. Children pointed from behind doors and fences, their eyes wide with curiosity and awe. And at the center of it all, Adanma's eyes flickered, her lips tightening as she sensed the change in the wind, the unseen currents that whispered of doom. She had not expected Nkechi to return so soon, not in the arms of a man as imposing and untamed as Obinna. Fear gripped her like a serpent, coiling around her chest. Ifunanya, standing beside her, trembled, the truth no longer containable. "Mother," she whispered, her voice breaking. Adanma's face snapped toward her daughter, fury exploding. "Do not speak!" she hissed. But it was too late. Eyes in the crowd had begun to settle on movement at the forest edge. A hush fell as Obinna and Nkechi stepped onto the path, the forest behind them a shadow of safety and mystery. Villagers gasped collectively, murmuring in awe. The girl they had mourned, the one they had thought lost to the river, stood before them, alive. Her gown mended with care, her hair cascading in a wild braid, and her eyes glinting with a mixture of fear, sorrow, and newfound strength. Obinna held her hand gently, his posture protective yet proud, radiating the power of a man whose courage had shaped destiny. The tension was palpable, a taut string stretched between past betrayal and the promise of justice. As Zeoha stepped forward, staff raised high, his face stern yet luminous with the authority of the spirits. "She walks among the living," he declared, "and it is time that the truth be unveiled." Adanma's facade cracked in an instant. Her lips quivered, eyes darting, searching for any means to escape the inevitability of exposure. "Lies!" she shrieked, voice cracking under the weight of panic. "She is a phantom!" I saw her slip, fall. But Ezeoha's gaze was unyielding, a mirror reflecting every falsehood back to her. "No," he said, "the river did not claim her. Only envy guided a hand meant to nurture." The crowd murmured, whispers spreading like wildfire. Ifunanya stepped forward, her voice shaking yet resolute. "It is true," she said. "Mother, you pushed her. You wanted her gone." Gasps erupted. Adanma's face turned crimson, then pale, her hands trembling as if caught by invisible chains. "How dare you!" she spat. "Do you know what you are saying?" The priest's staff hit the ground once more. "The spirits know!" And now, so does the village. All eyes turned to Nkechi. She stepped forward, her legs steady, her back straight, the sun catching her beads and casting dancing lights across her face. "I am here," she announced, voice ringing clear over the crowd. "I am alive, and I will not be silenced by fear, by envy, or by lies." Her words carried the weight of a girl forged in fire, strengthened by survival, and guided by the hand of destiny. Adanma staggered backward, disbelief etched into her features. The villagers closed in, their murmurs growing into a chorus of judgment. "She lives!" someone shouted, "and you would have killed her!" Others nodded, pointing accusing fingers at the stepmother who had feigned grief for days. Ifunanya held her breath, trembling as she watched her mother's world collapse. Adanma turned her fury toward Nkechi. "You! How dare you return! You will never take what belongs to me!" But Nkechi raised her hand, her expression calm yet resolute. "Nothing of mine belongs to you," she said. "You cannot touch my destiny, nor can you undo the love and care I have received from those who truly cherish life and justice." Obina moved closer, placing a protective hand on her shoulder, signaling to the crowd that he would stand by her if any violence erupted. The villagers watched, a mixture of awe and fear rippling through them. The truth had landed like a hammer. Adanma's evil had been revealed, and there was no room left for deceit. The wind shifted, rustling leaves as if carrying whispers from the ancestors, approving of the courage and justice unfolding before the square. Ezeoha raised his staff, the final words of judgment vibrating in the air. "Adanma, you have betrayed blood and spirit alike. The ancestors see your hand, and the village bears witness. Justice shall not be delayed." Adanma's knees buckled. She fell to the earth, clutching at her heart, her cries raw with panic and rage. The elders moved forward, their presence authoritative, signaling that punishment would follow. Ifunanya, tears streaming down her face, finally spoke her truth to the village. "I saw it. I was silent. I cannot protect lies anymore." The crowd gasped at her bravery, and the weight of collective judgment settled over Adanma like a shroud. Meanwhile, Nkechi, standing beside Obina, felt a sense of liberation she had never known. Though betrayal had scarred her, and near death had tested her soul, she now stood at the threshold of justice, of love, and of a destiny she had fought to reclaim. The village, once buzzing with grief and suspicion, now hummed with awe and reverence. Adanma's reign of envy and cruelty had crumbled, her power stripped bare by truth, courage, and the guiding hand of the spirits. And in the midst of it all, Obina's steady presence reminded Nkechi that love, when paired with bravery, could not only save lives, it could restore entire souls. Adanma knelt on the red earth floor of the village square, her once proud stance reduced to trembling submission. The elders circled her, their staffs heavy with authority, their eyes like burning coals, reflecting the fury of justice long delayed. "Adanma," Ezeoha intoned, "your envy has burned like fire, seeking to consume the innocent. You have defied blood, spirit, and the will of the ancestors. Now you shall face the consequence." Adanma's lips quivered as she sought words, but none could form. Her plots, her manipulations, even the intricate lies she had spun over the years, all lay bare before the watchful village and the unyielding priest. The air was thick with tension, and every villager leaned in as though their very breath could witness the final reckoning. Ezeoha raised his staff, the cowries rattling faintly in the morning light, a sound that seemed to echo judgment through every heartbeat. "The punishment for one who tries to snuff out life with envy is exile. You shall leave Umuaka, and no path shall lead you back until you have shown humility, remorse, and the cleansing of your soul." Adanma's face paled further. Pride, which had once inflated her chest like a shield, shattered into jagged fragments. She opened her mouth to speak, to plead, to curse, but the words found no anchor. The villagers murmured among themselves, some with approval, others with wary curiosity. For exile in Umuaka's customs was no mere absence. It was a living test, a sentence that could alter destiny itself. Ifunanya, standing beside Nkechi, felt the air tremble with her own relief. The burden she had carried, of witnessing evil and saying nothing, began to lighten. And in the distance, Obina's steady gaze met Nkechi's, silently affirming that her strength, her resilience, and her survival had not been in vain. Nkechi stepped forward, her feet firm on the sun-warmed earth, and addressed the villagers. "I return, not for vengeance, but for truth," she said, her voice carrying the rhythm of her journey, of battles fought and survived. She recounted the fall, her stepmother's hand, the river's cruelty, and the hunter who saved her. Every word, every pause painted the village square with living colors of her struggle. Children stared wide-eyed, elders nodded with solemn recognition, and even some women wept silently, for they understood the bravery required to speak such truths. Obina remained slightly behind her, protective but unobtrusive, the embodiment of the quiet power that had shielded her. As Nkechi spoke, her gown fluttered gently in the breeze, a symbol of life reclaimed from the hands of death. The villagers, once convinced of her demise, now saw the evidence not in objects, but in her presence, alive, strong, and unbroken. Whispers of awe rippled through the crowd. "She lived," one exclaimed, "and she stands before us stronger than any of us could imagine." Others nodded, eyes misting. The village, bound by ancestral lore and tradition, understood that Nkechi's survival was more than chance. It was a message, a lesson, and a turning point. Obina finally stepped beside her, his hand brushing hers, a subtle but profound display of the bond formed through fire, forest, and faith. Meanwhile, Ifunanya approached Nkechi, her small hands trembling as she reached for her sister. "Nkechi," she whispered, voice thick with emotion, I should have spoken. I should have stopped her." Nkechi held her gaze, her eyes softening. "You were a child in the shadow of fear," she said. "It is not too late to make things right." They embraced, a long, healing hug that mended the invisible fracture of years, filled with betrayal and silence. Obina watched, a quiet smile forming at the corners of his lips, knowing that the bond of sisters reunited was as sacred as the bond of love that had bloomed between him and Nkechi. Adanma, isolated and seething with impotent fury, shrank further under the weight of the village's gaze. She realized that exile would strip not only her body from the land she had controlled, but also her spirit from the life she had tried to manipulate. The village began to chant softly, invoking the ancestors, acknowledging Nkechi's survival and courage. Ezeoha's voice rose above the chant, "Let this serve as a lesson. Envy destroys the house that harbors it, but courage, truth, and love build bridges across despair." Every word sank deep into the villagers' hearts, reinforcing the values of their culture, community, justice, and the enduring power of right over wrong. Obina stepped forward, his voice steady and deep, resonating with the authority of one who has fought both men and fate. Nkechi is not only a survivor, she is a child of Umuaka, a bearer of ancestral favor. She shall walk among you with the respect due to her courage, and none may challenge her place without consequence. The crowd murmured in agreement, elders nodding solemnly. Children ran forward to touch her hands, drawn to the aura of life she exuded, while women whispered about the strength and wisdom she had gained through hardship. Adanma's lips twisted in anger, yet she found herself powerless in the face of collective judgment. Ifunanya stood tall, pride shining in her eyes for the first time, her loyalty finally realigned with justice and the well-being of the family she had almost lost. Nkechi turned to Obina, the sun catching his sharp features, casting shadows that mirrored the depth of the forest where they had grown together. Their hands met once more, and in that touch was the quiet promise of love nurtured in hardship and tempered by courage. Together, they symbolized a new dawn for the village, a combination of survival, justice, and love that even the cruelest envy could not extinguish. With the trial of truth concluded, the village turned its focus to celebration and healing. Ezeoha instructed that a festival be held in honor of Nkechi's survival, a symbolic act of restoring life and reinforcing the moral lessons that had been threatened by Adanma's cruelty. Drums thundered, dancing filled the square, and songs were sung recounting the courage of the girl who had defied death and the treachery of her stepmother. Obina and Nkechi moved among the villagers, their presence a living testament to the balance between love, justice, and destiny. Adanma, meanwhile, prepared for exile, her heart heavy with loss and the bitter taste of lessons learned too late. Ifunanya walked beside her, silently forgiving, silently teaching the power of speaking truth, and silently bearing witness to the transformation of her family and community. The sun dipped low, casting golden light over Umuaka, illuminating the faces of all who had been part of this tale. Children danced in joy, elders recited proverbs aloud, and the forest itself seemed to hum in approval. Nkechi, standing tall, felt a profound connection to the life she had fought to reclaim, the love she had found, the bond of family restored, and the enduring respect of her community. She knew that her journey had not ended with survival. It had begun anew, with the wisdom to see evil for what it was, the courage to face it, and the love to heal the wounds it had inflicted. In that moment, under the fading sun and the watchful eyes of ancestors, a girl who had once been cast down embraced her destiny fully, a living testament to the power of truth, resilience, and the balance between good and evil. The village square pulsed with life as celebrations continued, the air thick with the scent of roasting meats, fresh palm wine, and wildflowers strewn across the ground in honor of Nkechi's return. Children ran in spirals around the elders, laughing as the drums boomed rhythmically, a heartbeat echoing across the land. Every corner of Umuaka seemed to vibrate with renewed energy, a testament to the balance restored after years of deceit and fear. Nkechi moved through the crowd, her hands gently brushing the heads of children and the shoulders of elders, offering gratitude with a smile that radiated resilience and wisdom far beyond her years. Obinna followed closely, his presence both protective and celebratory, a living proof of strength born from love and survival. The villagers whispered to each other about the girl who had returned from the brink of death, speaking of courage, destiny, and the lessons the gods had woven into her story. Ezeoha raised his staff one final time during the festival, his voice carrying above the jubilation. "Let this day be remembered," he proclaimed, "not merely for the survival of one, but for the triumph of truth over deceit, of courage over fear, and of unity over envy." Every villager nodded, some bowing their heads in reverence, acknowledging that the forces that govern life, spiritual and human, had spoken clearly. The festival was more than celebration. It was ritual, affirmation, and education rolled into one, ensuring that generations to come would remember the price of envy and the power of resilience. In the following days, Nkechi began to rebuild her life, intertwining her own desires with the rhythms of the village. She returned to her studies, now with a fierce determination and a clarity of purpose. Teachers marveled at her focus, noting the wisdom in her eyes and the patience in her hands. Every lesson, every scroll read, every problem solved was infused with the strength forged from her survival. Obinna remained by her side, guiding her through both practical skills learned in the forest and deeper, spiritual understandings of the land, the people, and the spirits that watched over Umuaka. Their love blossomed quietly, tethered to respect, shared experience, and mutual admiration. Ifunanya, now free from fear and guilt, devoted herself to supporting Nkechi, eager to restore not just the household, but the moral fabric of the family. Together, the sisters moved through the village with a renewed sense of purpose, each step a statement of survival, love, and justice. Adanma, meanwhile, departed for exile, her pride shattered, but her lessons painfully etched into memory. The village watched her leave in silence, understanding that exile was a form of spiritual correction as much as punishment, a time for reflection and for confronting one's own darkness. Nkechi's return sparked a wave of reflection across Umuaka. Parents whispered to their children about honesty, loyalty, and the dangers of envy. Elders recounted the tale of the girl who had been pushed off a cliff but returned stronger than ever, a living proverb illustrating that malice may strike, but truth and resilience endure. The community embraced her as both a daughter and a teacher of virtue, inviting her to participate in council discussions and youth mentorship programs. She spoke openly of her experiences, weaving lessons about vigilance, courage, and the protective power of love into every story. Obinna became a respected figure as well, lauded not only for saving Nkechi's life, but for embodying the qualities of integrity, bravery, and humility. Their relationship, once secretive in the forest, now became a symbol of hope. That love born from hardship could flourish openly and strengthen a community. The villagers learned that survival alone was not enough. One must also uphold values, share knowledge, and contribute to the greater good. The tale of Nkechi became a living curriculum, a guide for future generations to navigate envy, deceit, and adversity with wisdom and courage. The forest, which had once been a place of survival and secrecy, now became a symbol of growth and learning. Nkechi and Obinna often returned there, teaching children about herbs, hunting responsibly, and listening to the subtle voices of nature. These excursions were not just practical lessons, they were spiritual journeys, bridging the world of humans and the unseen spirits that guided Umuwaka. Elders observed with approval, noting how Nkechi's experiences had transformed her into a leader whose wisdom was both natural and cultivated through adversity. The girl who had once been vulnerable became a beacon, a living testimony that resilience, love, and justice could shape a life in profound ways. Stories of her forest adventures were recounted alongside her near-death experience, creating a narrative tapestry rich with morality, cultural tradition, and personal growth. Obinna, always near but never overshadowing her, supported her with quiet strength, a reminder that love and partnership are as vital to leadership and survival as courage and wisdom. As the sun set over Umuwaka, casting long golden shadows across the village, Nkechi stood with Obinna and Ifunanya at the edge of the square, watching children dance and elders recount proverbs. The village had been restored not just in structure, but in spirit. Justice had been served, love had been nurtured, and the balance between good and evil reaffirmed. Nkechi's journey, from betrayal, near death, and exile into survival, love, and leadership, had become a living folktale, rich with lessons about human behavior, spiritual guidance, and the power of resilience. She understood that destiny was not merely the outcome of chance, but a path forged through courage, intelligence, and compassion. The community now looked to her as a role model, a young woman who embodied the values that sustained Umuwaka: loyalty, integrity, bravery, and an unwavering respect for both human and spiritual law. Obinna's hand found hers, and she smiled, not as the girl who had been pushed from a cliff, but as the woman who had faced death, love, and injustice, and emerged victorious. The village celebrated, not merely her survival, but the triumph of righteousness, love, and the moral teachings embedded in every moment of her journey. The ancestors' whispers seemed to echo in the breeze. Balance has been restored, justice prevails, and love endures. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't subscribed. Turn on the notification bell for more amazing stories and folktales. Like and share the story to your loved ones. That will be a kindness of you and a great support for me. See you on my next video.